Welcome back to the Tech Talks Daily podcast. Today we're joined by Chris Royles, EMEA Field CTO at Cloudera. And Chris is going to be joining us today to discuss the evolving concept of big data and why harnessing the power of hybrid data is the next challenge for businesses. And we'll also dive into the rise of hybrid data, the exponential growth of structured data in the past decade, the expectations for its continued growth. And Chris will also share his insights on how organisations can reap the benefits of hybrid data by implementing modern data architectures, all that integrate multifunctional data analytics with secure and governed data management, enabling real-time data-driven decision-making. That's where every business leader wants to be right now. And of course, we'll also discuss the impacts of regulations like GDPR and Schrems 2 on data governance, sovereignty, privacy requirements, and also explore factors businesses should consider before moving to the cloud. And also learn how a workload-first approach can help organisations optimise their data strategies in this rapidly changing data landscape. And we'll also have a little fun along the way. So buckle up and hold on tight as I beam your ear all the way to Bedfordshire here in the UK, where Chris Royles is going to be expanding our knowledge on big data, hybrid data, and the future of data management. So a massive warm welcome to the show. Can you tell the listeners a little about who you are and what you do?
Hey Neil, well, first of all, thank you for the invitation to present on your podcast. Hopefully we can have an interesting few minutes of discussion. So I'm very fortunate. I'm the field CTO at Cloudera for the EMEA region. So we have a team of field CTOs focused on really engaging with our client base and helping them understand the direction of travel we're going with technology. So I'm not the group CTO, I'm the field CTO. So it's always worth differentiating between the two. When you think about EMEA, it's quite a diverse set of countries and regions and also industries as well. So I do see that as a fortunate thing. I'm always learning because one day I might be talking to a global bank, an insurance company. Another day I might be talking to a telecoms provider. So I do find it's a very interesting role, and I get to see many different perspectives of how organizations work with information and manage their data.
And I think that's so important now, especially in a digital world where so many are locked inside their own echo chambers. Getting a variety of perspectives on every problem and the kind of work that you're doing, incredible stuff and good for the soul. And there's so many reasons I was excited to get you on the podcast today. But just to set the scene for our conversation, can you expand on why you believe that the concept of big data has actually become outdated in recent years? Can you expand on that?
That's an interesting question, and it's worth just reflecting on it. So I've been very fortunate, again, to be in the industry for a number of years. So I've been with Cloudera for 7.5 years, and prior to that, I worked at Oracle for 3 years. And at Oracle, I was supporting, if you like, the sale of big data appliances that back then ran Cloudera software in order to provide big data. So I was doing big data and Cloudera before I joined Cloudera. I then joined Cloudera, and I got to live, if you like, the real detail of what it meant. And I'll come on to a little bit later, but it's kind of like a bit of journey that we've gone through as an organization, and I'll share some of that with you. But in simple terms, I think big data now is seen as table stakes. So many organizations can do it. It's kind of been commoditized in many ways. The cloud providers have data lakes that are scalable and very resilient and durable. And so organizations today don't necessarily think about big data being a problem they need to solve because it can be solved in so many different ways. One thing probably to reflect on is there was a moment when to do big data, you needed to go and build a platform to manage it. And you needed to bring together all of the technologies you needed to make that a successful thing. And many organizations were successful, but there were also those that fell by the wayside and just couldn't bring it all together and get it to work for them in the right way. So big data kind of got labeled as a hard problem to solve. Then we went through the evolution of kind of cloud computing and the separation of compute or workload and storage where you manage your data. And that that transition, if you like, is something that helped the industry sort of come to terms with what you might refer to as web scale, large scale workload, large scale data management.
And I would suspect that every business leader listening has had problems with departments working in silos, data silos, and so many other areas around that. But I'm curious, the question I've got to ask is how did we get here? Can you expand on how businesses are using data and the kind of challenges they often come up against, especially with managing their data?
Yeah, so and it really is, for some organizations, it could be a real challenge. If you go to somebody like a financial services business, they may have 10, 14 copies of their customer records. What that means in simple terms is if somebody needs to make a change to those customer records, they have to make it in 14 different places and keep track of all of that. So that's an example of why it gets hard really fast. And that organization would want to consolidate that and simplify, let's say. But if we went on a journey, and within my business, we refer to it as kind of like the 1.0 all the way through to the 4.0. Think of the 4.0 as into the future. And so if I just take you through the first three, that'll sort of set the scene, really. If you think about 1.0, that was very much we need to go and do big data, and you'd build what would be referred to as a monolithic technology stack. It would be a series of servers with all of the storage and compute required to run the workload and manage the data. So a large organization like a bank would then ask the question, how do I run multiple types of use case on that platform? And they had two options. They could either take that platform and make it multi-tenant, so multiple teams using a single platform, or they'd stand up a second, third, fourth platform by use case. And so what happened is it became either very difficult to manage the tenancy within this platform, or they'd create multiple silos on a per use case basis. And then integrating those silos together would be the challenge. And so back in the day, the sort of 1.0, that was really where we were at. And it was really a technology barrier or a way it had been architected that made that interesting, if you like, to try and overcome. So then we moved forward a little bit, and it's kind of like the 2.0. And kind of we went through some technology changes and everything within our own company and sort of looked at the technology and how it could be, in many ways, decomposed. How could we solve against organizations not doing those two things? Improve the tenancy aspects or reduce the need to have a per use case cluster. And that's what we refer to as kind of like 2.0. So Cloudera merged with Hortonworks, so it was a bit of a consolidation around the technology. And at that point, we realized we can't just carry on as we are doing the same thing for our customers. We need to listen to them, understand the challenges, and we need to bring a new capability to the market. So we thought very, in a very focused way about that, and we took the technology and decomposed it. So in simple terms, there's three layers. There's a workload layer that we call our data services. There's a shared layer in the middle that manages all of the long-lived sort of persistent information to do with data across all instances. We call it the shared data experience. And then below is your storage. So we decomposed it. And that was really important because what it meant is you could then take that decomposed architecture and deploy it anywhere. You could deploy it into your data center or natively into cloud. And that's where we are today. We refer to it as taking the technology and delivering it as a platform, a service in your choice of deployment. And so the real benefits there is we're now able to help customers at 2.0 think about their journey to cloud, and in many cases help them migrate out of their data center into public cloud of their choice and give them the flexibility to do so. Now, when we think about the next step, kind of what we're doing right now, the 3.0, the current state of the world right now, we're kind of moving to, okay, we've helped organizations modify what they have in their data center. Go on to some of the detail on that. But also we've helped them move to cloud, and now they have choice of deployment. What do we need to help them with next? And what we need to help them with next is portability of workloads and be able to see all of their data. So going all the way back to the 1.0, I've got multiple use cases. How do I manage and deploy each of those use cases on a shared platform? And what if that shared platform was deployed in different locations across the organization? based on different areas of the organization, or based on regulatory constraints on where data can be managed and maintained, or based on efficiencies around cost or workload efficiency on cloud, say. And so with 3.0, it's really about this hybrid and multi-cloud, and making that really easy. That would be seen as hard and complicated. How do we make that really easy, especially when you're managing hundreds of petabytes of data as an organization? So that's kind of the 3.0. How do we really help an organization do that at greater scale? The 4.0 is kind of like the futures. And that's quite interesting, because that's how do we make it even easier?
And you do make it sound incredibly easy, but as you said there, for many business leaders thinking about multi-cloud, hybrid cloud, that next step into the world of Web3 can often feel incredibly overwhelming and daunting. So as we're making those, or before we make that step and begin to have those preparations in place, can you elaborate on the importance of having a modern data architecture that integrates multifunction data analytics with secure and governed data management? And how does that help organizations harness the power of hybrid data for real-time decision-making? Because again, we all know what we need to do, but it can be quite overwhelming. How do we get there?
Certainly. So as I said, some organizations might approach it and say, "Oh, okay, hybrid sounds complicated." So it's then our task, if you like, to make that relatively easier for them. So much of my time is spent helping organizations understand the art of the possible, and that actually it can be done in an easier way. And we tend to approach it in maybe two foundational ways. If you kind of look into what ThoughtWorks has done around data mesh, I'm not going to mesh wash what we do, right? The first thing to say is that what I like about it is it helps us take the paradigm and the 4 principles of data mesh and think, okay, this is about organizational, how a large-scale enterprise can bring more people to their data and make those people more effective. Also, it helps them think more about how they treat their data as a true asset and product to the business. And some of the principles are around security and federation. So you should have federated security and governance. And so as you go through kind of the data mesh pattern, I'll refer to it as a pattern, it's more a philosophy. Think a bit of it about how you can scale an organization and bring more people across the organization to the data you have under management. And interestingly, strong security and governance helps with that. The more security and governance you put in place, the more users you can present more data to. It's counterintuitive, but that's how it actually operates at scale. Very quickly, data mesh can be seen as a little bit, okay, I get it, yep, set of principles, we can follow those principles, yep, okay, that all makes sense. So how do I actually go ahead and do something concrete? I want to build something, how do I do it? And so what we then do is we work very closely with the analyst community, and we say, okay, this is our technology. Which category does it fit into? And they'll say, well, we've got this category called a data fabric, and we think you fit in that category. Here's a set of questions. Tell us how your technology matches these data fabric qualities. And so for us to do that, for example, we answer those questions. We're graded to our peers, and then they define our technology as a data fabric. So when it comes to the practice of implementation, we would guide organizations to take a data fabric approach that has the centralized governance and security aspects, but it also thinks of data as products, so some of the same principles, alignment with data mesh, and it also talks about delegating ownership and managing data close to where it's sourced. So people understand the data where it's sourced, understand the use cases and problems, can think about how that's presented back to the organization, or more interestingly, maybe outside of the organization as a data product. So this is where data fabric starts to come into play. It's the how rather than the why would you do it. It's more concrete. So that's probably one of the things I'd sort of flag around modern data architectures.
And it feels like we're living in a crazy time at the moment, because on one side of the coin, we have every employee having an expectation to access company data very quickly from any device, on any network, at any time and in any location. there's also seeing a thing like global uncertainty, global conflict, etc., and a more greater awareness of where is our data located, what countries have access to that data, where are those data centers situated, etc. And then we have regulations like GDPR and Schrems too. So I'm curious, how have these new regulations influenced things like data governance, sovereignty, and privacy requirements for organizations? And also explain the concept of an always-on and everywhere governance, because it's rising to the top of concern for boardrooms and entering conversations, isn't it now?
So one thing I noticed is Schrems 2 especially kind of put a pause on a number of programs with across organizations I was speaking to. So what it did was it made people think in a bit more detail about what they were doing and why they were doing it. And so those organizations that were already on journeys to the cloud kind of put a pause on some of that and just had to go through more rounds of due diligence. As part of that period, we found a number of organizations choosing to, if you like, stay as is. We'll stay in the data center. So one of the European banks I was talking to at the time, they gave a great example. The comment was very simple. They said, well, we know we're going to move to cloud. We know we'll get there eventually, but our security team need to sign off on it. And while they're going through that process, we still need to run a bank. So there, we're going to run in the data center. So they had a very pragmatic approach, and they were taking the right steps in order to reduce their risks, if you like. Other organizations, European Telecom, they were well on their journey, and they had to then rethink and bring some of their workloads back into their data centers. And so again, they had to, if you like, pivot and come back again. And so what we are seeing is more organizations question whether they need to repatriate certain workloads that are already on cloud. And there's usually two drivers for repatriating the workloads. One is the regulatory landscape. And one way to think of that in financial services terms, they'd refer to it as a stressed exit. Better way to think of that is somebody's going to tell us to take our data and workload and move it at some point under stress and duress. And it could be a change in regulation, or it could be a breach or something of that nature, or an outage. And they under stress, as in business stress and strain, need to be able to move that workload and that data somewhere else. And so one of the things we speak to organizations about a lot is having the flexibility to move a workload and data between clouds or back to their data center when and if they choose. And actually be able to demonstrate that, actually do it in practical terms, not just theoretical on paper. And so one of the things we've been really focused on is the foundations to be able to enable that. And one of the foundations we built is a common code base across everything we do. So within the technology, irrespective of where it's deployed, whether it's natively integrated on cloud or whether it's running in your data center, it uses the same runtime engines and code base. And so the logic, performance, and way of working and operating, even down to how the security and authentication and security policies operate, is consistent irrespective of where you deploy it. So really helping organizations understand that they now have choice. That always on and everywhere. Another example, I'm working with a client who's moving to cloud at the moment, and the first step of that movement is standing up our data lake service and shared data experience and migrating their policy services across. So all of the work they've spent building over many years, their PII, GDPR, PCI, relevant policy models, they're able to replicate that straight to cloud before they move their data. So it's kind of making sure that the rules of data governance are in place before the data ends up behind those rules.
And I'm curious, if you were to take all the conversations you have with businesses, are there any trends in the kind of challenges organizations face when managing their data across on-premise and cloud environments and moving data between multiple clouds? Are there any commonalities there and the kind of questions or struggles that you hear about on a regular basis?
Well, I think the big one is it's yet another step in kind of the evolution of don't make more silos. I'm almost getting to the philosophy that there should be no copies of data. There's some statistics in terms of the total volume of data under management. It's in the trillions of. You go from sort of exabytes to zettabytes, and it's in the hundreds of zettabytes. And what they mean in that hundreds of zettabytes, this is like 120 zettabytes. What they mean is all data ingested under management and being used is vast. But what's actually happening under the hood is a lot of that data is just copies. And there's a number of different statistics, but sort of between 80 and 90% of that data is just a copy of data somewhere else. So the actual number isn't as big as you think when you actually start to think of how many times it might be copied. And people don't necessarily realize when they place data onto a cloud storage service, it'll be replicated several times in order to give the robustness to the data, the durability to the data. So that replication happens whether you want it to or not. It's transparent. You don't even notice. To you, it's just one file, but it might be replicated many times. And so one thing we've been really focused on is helping organizations think, well, how could they access data from their business systems more event-driven and real-time? And then if they need to bring it together, how do they make it accessible through workload that's connected to data, irrespective of where the data is stored and managed? So again, you can store and manage your data in a certain region or location, and you can also stand up workloads in a region or location. And then depending on how your end users come into the service, apply strong policy controls, authentication and policy that is region aware, geographically aware, and also even down to things like time of day. So you could apply very strong policy constraints to that data and workload right through the stack. And this is something that we would talk to organizations about and make sure that's always switched on. If you go back to my example of 1.0 way back in the day, you go back 10 years or so, people build these large monolithic clusters. There would be no data security or governance on them. Now, you have no choice. It has to be there. Again, it's like big data. It's almost like a table stake. It's expected. And without it, you're not in business in simple terms. And so that's another aspect of how the world's changed. So going back to kind of like the biggest challenge is really focus on how you're going to connect people to your data rather than where you're going to manage and run your data and workloads. Then look at the data and workloads and work out whether the policies that apply, the sovereignty or GDPR or PII constraints, enable you to store and manage data there or not. And so some of the organizations we work with, they're very happy to run their workloads on public cloud and done all the due diligence. Others, in simple terms, are not. And so they use it, if you like, our private cloud form factor to build out sovereign shared services across their organization.
And on behalf of a business leader listening anywhere in the world today, I'd love to bring everything we've talked about to life by walking someone through an entire journey there. So to begin with, what are the key factors that businesses should consider before deciding to move their data to the cloud, and the advantages of a workload-first approach over a cloud-first approach, and also then use workload and analytics to optimize their data management strategies, and make informed decisions about where to store and process their data, because that's where they need to get to. But can you just walk me through that typical journey?
Yeah, so as we approach that kind of big question, and first of all, it's worth mentioning, we spend a lot of time helping organizations define their plan of both modernizing what they have in their data center, as well as defining the best path to move what they have in their data center to cloud. And you get into interesting conversations where moving the volume of data they have in their data center to cloud could take weeks, if not months of time, just to move the data. And so you have to really think about this. This is a big investment an organization is going to undertake, and be prepared to kind of go through the pre-work, if you like, and the due diligence to make sure it all adds up and makes sense. The most important aspect is to take a data-driven approach. Understand your workload as is today, and then choose which workloads can move for best effect. And so just in simple terms, workloads that require elasticity, workloads that require isolation and more guarantees around SLA, typically those types of workloads run best in cloud. Workloads require flexibility. For example, I need to train a machine learning model. Maybe I'll do that on the cloud, but I might want to run that machine learning model in my factory in the data center, because it's the factory where I'm doing my preventative maintenance. And so organizations are really focused on, well, I need to have this hybrid workload because I need the flexibility of public cloud to take my data and convert it into a model that can make decisions on my behalf. And then I take that model and deploy it into my factory where the actual decision will take place. And so we're really focused on making sure that it's not just workloads, like be able to run a SQL query. It's also more complex workloads like a machine learning model, that they're entirely portable across environments. And so we would go on a journey with the customer, help them understand data-driven first, how to modernize what they have in their data center and optimize it, and then how to move the right workloads to cloud, and even which cloud to move them to by running suitable pilots and understanding the workload on each of the clouds and advising which cloud might be optimal for that workload, and then showing them how for certain workloads like machine learning models, they can bring those back into their data center or factories to execute them if they choose to. So it's certainly a journey we help take the client on, and we'd go through quite a bit of detail with them on the advantages and disadvantages of the choices they might have to make.
And I think the speed of technological change is moving at breakneck speed, faster than ever. But there's also that reality that it's never going to move this slow again, which is daunting on its own. And if we go back 6 months ago, futurists and analysts were all talking about predictions for 2023, what was going to change the landscape, etc. Nobody said generative AI. And of course, now that's all anyone's talking about. This space is continuously evolving, and it can be difficult to keep up with that. And in your role as EMEA Field CTO at Cloudera, how do you help businesses adapt their data strategies to keep up with these evolving, the evolving data landscape and all the continuously updating regulations as well? Because again, it's difficult, isn't it?
Well, a bit controversial on this one. Stepping back to my academic career, so I did sort of postgraduate studies at Liverpool University, and my focus there was on expert systems. And I've got a PhD in what was back then artificial intelligence and machine learning at a point in time. What I found was going to sort of AI and ML conferences. You go to a conference, it would all be about vision. You go to another conference, and it would all be about customer sentiment. I'm about to go to a conference next week, and I'm anticipating it all be about large language models for some reason. I'm not sure why. I'm very much around generative AI. And what I'm finding in the ML kind of domain is things can kind of come in very spiky waves. Something will be hot today, gone tomorrow, hot today, gone tomorrow. I don't see this going away, but I think this will be kind of like another step on the journey, I try not to think too spiky in the way I think. I've got to think more strategic. I've got to think, okay, what does AI actually mean in use? And so something like generative AI, everybody's getting excited because they think of it as things like lead generation, or it'll help people search on documentation, and I'm thinking, actually, that's not going to give enough value, really, is it? What is it really going to be able to do for us? So really exploring where the value is going to lie in generative AI is interesting. And one thing I've been using it for myself is if I need a background to a slide, I'll take the slide notes, put it into an image generative AI and say, give me a background. And actually it's doing a really good job of some of that right now. So if I want something about hybrid multi-cloud, I'll go and generate an image for it. Actually doing a really, it's doing really well. But yeah, I think it's very difficult to navigate the speed at which this domain is moving right now. And even as an organization ourselves, we're going through the steps of, okay, what does this mean for our own business? What does this mean for the organizations that we provide our capabilities to? And what does it mean for the industry and the industries we work with more broadly? And it's coming across as relatively disruptive. So yeah, it's certainly worth more exploration and research. And I say that's where we are right now. One thing to reflect on is, back last year, we had a practical kind of research. We have a practical research team within our business, Fast Forward Labs, and they've been writing and publishing reports And one of those reports was on question answering using machine learning models and tokenization and text, not on large language models, but on large data sets, and being more structured in the way you can ask a question and it will give an answer based on a more constrained corpus of information. And so that was published last year, and we provide that free as a report as a prototype online, but we also kind of embed it into our machine learning platform so you can immediately create it with a single click and kind of demonstrate practically the core components of what sits behind that. Now, true, it's not ChatGPT, but it is a generative model because it's creating answers to questions that you're asking, and it's intelligent in the way it interprets the context and the questions asked.
And it's such an important point you made there about moving away from that spiky thinking to a more strategic approach. I mean, if we go back 12 months ago, all anyone was talking about was the metaverse. And I think it was an article in Wall Street Journal yesterday that was calling it the metaverse. And also Disney and a variety of companies are walking away from that metaverse vision. And I must admit, from this podcast, I get a lot of pictures coming on saying, yeah, this company wants to talk about the metaverse. And then I get them on and they say, actually, can we scrap the metaverse talk? Because it's they've kind of moved on from it, which is quite revealing. And then the generative AI at the moment is capturing conversations. But I was reading the other day of something called, I think it's Runaway ML, which is text to video, where you can literally say, show me a video of Chris walking down a street with a lion, and it will create that video. It's just, it's difficult to keep up, isn't it?
To your point, I think you mentioned Web3,
Yep.
in passing, and I didn't really come back to it, but the way we kind of think of it is Web3 is around, if you like, more democratization of an organization and business, and reliant on things like blockchains and things. What we're more focused on is the more practical aspects of, well, okay, how do we democratize access to data, and how do we provide self-service to data, and how do we make that easier for an enterprise organization? So it's not Web3.
Yeah.
It doesn't rely on a blockchain, but it does rely on federation. It does rely on each domain within the organization be able to stand up their own infrastructure and their own data services. And so when you think of a technology like Web3, it's more like, okay, what does it actually mean in practice?
Yeah.
Do we need to implement a blockchain, or is there a different way to do it? And so democratizing access to data and the management and ownership of data is kind of like our parallel to doing just that. And then when you think about metaverse, the way I refer to metaverse is just think for a minute about the data. What we're effectively doing is we put a headset on, we've got two hand controls. We're now augmented all of our kind of telemetry of our body. We've created a clone of ourselves, a digital twin, if you like, in that virtual environment. And so I always map it then to digital twins. Why it gets interesting is you need to forecast and predict based on network latencies where people and objects are in the virtual environment. And then you need to bring many digital twins together. And so in my world, it's like, that sounds like a lot of data to me.
Yeah.
Right? So that's kind of what gets me excited about the metaverse. But again, it's not using metaverse as the keyword or the buzz term, if you like. It's, okay, what does it actually mean? It feels very similar to digital twin. And what does that mean? Well, it means we need to bring maybe 300 people together in a collaborative environment. Well, okay, the volume of data involved in that is the substantial thing we need to worry about. Bring under governance, help manage the privacy of it, manage the transactional aspects of it. So it's that we think about.
And despite me saying we should be moving away from things that spike our interests and shiny distractions, tech buzzwords, etc., I'm going to ask you to look into your virtual crystal ball into the future and ask you, what do you think will be the next major trend or challenge in data management and analytics? Is there anything you're seeing, and especially how organizations could possibly prepare for it or start reading up on it? Is there anything that's caught your attention?
Well, certainly seeing organizations just take a more practical approach around workload. And when I spoke with IDC and they sort of said workload first rather than cloud first, and then in the news, you start seeing more organizations repatriate and have a real concrete evidence-based reason for doing so. I find that quite interesting. But one topic I didn't cover, which I didn't mention, was sort of the 4.0, and probably want to touch briefly on that. It's when you think about data, and when you think about data at scale, and when you take kind of that hybrid goes away, all we care about is a human user or maybe not a human user, maybe an agent of some sort, being able to use data in the right way, under governance and management, fully audited. What are the things we need to bring together to make that work really well? And again, going back, we learned a lot from 1.0 to 2.0, from 2.0 to 3.0. Each step was learning, engaging with our industry and customer base to kind of learn what they needed and understand the direction of travel in terms of the kind of technology landscape. So 4.0 is really about automation. It's taking much more data about how users interact with the platform. You'll hear of observability. What we mean is full stack, right through the applications, through the engines, through the data, full observability. What does that enable? It enables us to then understand how people interact with the data. It helps us understand how to tune and optimize the engine for best performance and efficiency. It helps us optimize how the data is laid out on the object store. And so every level, we're able to start optimizing. How do we optimize? Well, what if it's autonomous? What if we automate? And so we bring a lot more automation in. Maybe that needs to be a closed loop with human in the first instance, but we want to move that everything's more proactive rather than reactive. Everything will be able to optimize the data automatically. And so these are the sort of things that we're exploring and making sure that that's core to what we offer, and really making, as I mentioned, data and data management and the operational aspect around it, irrespective of where your data and workloads are, far easier and far more accessible to a wider community within your organization.
Wow, and I think that's a beautiful moment to end on. And we've covered so much in our 40 minutes together today. But before I let you go, for anyone listening who wants to take a further deep dive into this, where's the best place for listeners to find you or your team online, find out more about anything we talked about today? What's the best starting point for all things Cloudera?
Certainly, I think there's probably three things. One, please take a look at cloudera.com, our website. We've just done a big refresh on that. We have weekly demonstrations of the software available, which you can go through self-taught in terms of self-paced. Second will be, we've got a series of Evolve events coming up, and I'd encourage you to subscribe to those. And finally, please reach out to me direct. You can find me on LinkedIn, Chris Royles, Royles. I'd love to carry on the conversation. And Neil, thank you very much for giving us this opportunity to talk today.
No, thank you for taking the time to talk with us about how that term big data has been used to refer to data sets that were too large and complex for traditional data processing and analysis tools to handle effectively. But here we are now, 2023, technology has advanced and the capabilities of data processing and analysis tools have increased, and that threshold for what is considered big data has also increased. So many big questions at the end of our conversation there. Big data has become dated, and harnessing the power of hybrid data could be the next big challenge. But I'd love to hear more from the listeners, see what they think, hear more about their experiences and insights too. But more than anything, Chris, just thank you for starting this conversation today.
You're welcome, Neil. Thank you.
That's a wrap for today's episode of Tech Talks Daily. And I want to extend my sincerest thanks to Chris Royles, EMEA Field CTO at Cloudera, for joining us and sharing his invaluable insights on the evolution of big data, hybrid data, and so much more. And I hope you've gained deeper understanding of the kind of challenges and opportunities in equal measure that hybrid data presents, as well as the importance of modern data architecture, effective growth governance, to help businesses thrive in this rapidly changing technological landscape. And as we all continue to navigate the ever-changing world of data management and analytics, I think it is essential for organisations to stay ahead of the curve and embrace new approaches to harness the power of hybrid data. And so please remember, visit Cloudera's website, reach out to their team of experts for more information and guidance on how you can optimise your data strategy. And I also invite you to join me for another informative and thought-provoking episode of Tech Talks Daily, bright and early tomorrow morning. And remember, if you enjoyed today's discussion, please don't forget to subscribe to our podcast and share it with your friends and colleagues. And if you have a little time, please leave a rating and review, because it helps the podcast more than you know. So a big thank you for listening as always, and until next time, don't be a stranger.